Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Build It with Tim. On this week's episode, we're going back to our Family Planner application, and we're getting creative with the pages and the custom component. So the goal of today is we're going to take our Family Planner app and we're going to start to stylize it. And we're going to start adding some custom code using the custom component. And the goal is to take the list that we have per family. So when we have grocery lists or to-do lists, we're going to take it from looking like this, which is basically how I left it last time in part one. And we're going to go from this to this. So we're going to break this into essentially just two or three pieces. Number one, we've applied a theme to the Family Planner app. Number two, we're using the custom component to stylize and be more creative with how we actually display the list items within our grocery list in that example. And number three, just the CSS that gets applied to the page and how we actually configure the page in order to give this appearance of this unified kind of to-do list component. So number one, we'll start with the themes. So the themes are located in settings under themes, and we're going to click on explore themes and we're going to change this. So right now we're using the Atlas custom theme, but I'm going to change this over to the Luna theme. Okay. And just by default, you can see here when I load this app back up now we have the Luna theme applied. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move the menu. So I want the menu to be on the left-hand side of this app as like a sidebar navigation, and that will push the whole app content over to the right a little bit. And that's incredibly easy to do. All we have to do is go to our layout, select our menu, go to options, and change the menu style from horizontal to vertical. Again, after a refresh, we now have our menu located on the left-hand side. So that's what we're looking for today. And now we need to kind of start playing around with how our to-do lists or checklists are styled and formatted. So by default, like I said, the last time we were in this app, this is how we left it. We had a form on the left-hand side, and then we had all of our list items on the right in this list component. And you can see one item kind of per row. But I want to make this look more like an actual checklist, like more interactive, easier to use. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to basically just start from scratch. So we're going to delete everything on the page. And then we know that we need to bring back a form to add new stuff and a component to display all of the stuff in our list. So we'll start with just deleting the whole row. We'll start with a blank page, and then we'll just add a new row back in. All right, so we've added our row back in, and it's just going to be one column right now. So initially, the way I'm going to build this, I'm probably just going to build the three components that I'm going to use on the page, and then we'll put them all together in the end. So we'll start with the detail. So when we view this page, right, we are from the family dashboard, we have a link that goes to all of the lists for a family. And then you can click on a list to view the details of that list. And that's where we are now. We're on list details. So I'm going to start by adding a custom component. And this is going to be a detail view of the list. Okay, so we're going to select the data table of list because that's what we want to view the detail of, not the list items, but the list itself. And we're going to start here. Okay, and within the actual template area of the custom component, right, this is where we're going to actually place our code. And we need to place our code inside or in between these two each helper tags here. I know I talked a little bit about custom component before, but just as a refresher, the each helper, where we say each records, this is telling the custom component to loop through all of the records within our selected data source. And right now our data source is the list. So in this case, because it's a detail, it's only going to loop through one record because every list item on this page is only connected to one list. But we're going to loop through that using the each tags. And we're going to keep this really simple. First, we're just going to create two div elements and a paragraph element. So this is going to be our base structure. We're going to have like an overall container, and then we're going to have a smaller container within, and then we're going to have the text inside of that. So our first container or div element here is going to be our list header. Okay, so this is going to define kind of the box as a whole of where our list header is going to sit. And then we'll do list title. So this is going to be the container for the actual list title itself. And then the list title is going to be just a paragraph. And for this, we are going to use the list type. Okay, so every single list connects to a list type. And again, we might have to go back and watch part one just to refresh our memory a little bit. But the list types were like grocery, to do, homework, whatever. You can build your own list type. That was the whole point of the Family Planner app. But in this case, in this example, it was connected to a grocery list type. So this is going to output that value. And in this case, it's going to be grocery list. Okay, and that's all we need for now. So we're going to start looping through the records. We're going to create this element, and then inside that one, we're going to spit out the text for the list type as a paragraph text. And I'm not going to do any of the CSS now. We're going to come back and do the CSS after we're done. But for now, you can see how this looks. We're going to refresh this page, and here's where we're at. So we've outputted the name of our grocery, or of our list, which is grocery list. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is the actual form. We're going to do a form to add a new item to the list. And I'm just going to do this, like I said, I'm going to break this down into individual rows and columns, and then we'll merge all this stuff back together in order to make it look the way we want. Right, so we're going to add a form, and it's going to be to add a new list item connected to this list. Now, for this form, we want it to be incredibly basic. We don't want really any text, because the end goal is that it's going to be contained within this checklist. And we're going to actually go back to the data builder here in a moment in order to just place some help text on this particular form. So all I'm going to do is add the title field, and I'm going to remove the actual field title, and I'm going to remove the form title. Okay, and what that does is this. It's just a very blank form. And one last thing we'll remove is this back to link here. So we want this to be the most basic version of a form as we possibly can. And then in order to guide people and let them know what this form is actually for, we've added this placeholder inside the form. And we've done that through the data builder, list items, and the title field. So if we double click to edit that particular field, we can add a placeholder text, and this will appear inside the actual text input on the form every time it's used in a form. So we don't actually need the title of the field title that's called title. We can just use the placeholder value here. All right, so back to our page here. That's all we need to do for our form. So we're going to use it just like this. And then again, we're going to combine all of these items at the end. So the last one here, which is the most complicated one, is the actual list items. So back to the custom component. And in this case, we're choosing the list. Now, again, this has nothing to do with the list component or how we are actually working with lists in this app. This is simply stating that we are listing out the records. So for multiple records in the custom component, we need to choose the list version. And here we're going to see a similar screen as we do in other components, where we want to view list items connected to this list. Okay, this is all going to be the same, but now we can start to build out this particular structure. Okay, so like I said, this one's going to be a little bit more complex. For now, we're going to just kind of collapse that and get it out of our way slightly, because we're going to start with a section at the top of this component where we're going to utilize filter tabs. So first, let's actually create our filter tabs. The first one is just going to be called all. So this is going to show all of the items within the list. And to do that, we'll just make sure that the title is not blank. Easy way to do that, because every single title should have a value. And that way this will show all of the list items. The next one is going to be active items, so things that are still left to be completed. So we'll say if done is completed, is not completed. And the last one is completed. And we're going to set that value like that. So the way these filter tabs work and how we can use them within the custom component is through a filter tab ID. So there's actually no, we don't show the ID here, but it's done in order of how they are appear on the actual page. So in our documentation about the custom component, if you go to our help center and check out those custom component documents, you'll see that explained there. Where this is filter tab 1, 2, and 3. So we can simply use those numbers to identify which filter tab is which. The other thing I'm going to do is hide the clear filter tab. And I actually want to go into the options here and I want to disable the showing of the filter tab because we're going to build our own. And we're also going to turn off the action bar. So we're not really not going to show anything in this component in terms of pagination, record counts, refresh button, or the actual filter tab. We're going to build whatever we need ourselves. And we'll just increase this record limit just in case here. But if you were to have a checklist with 100 items. So we're going to save that now and just flip back to our live app just to see what's going on here. Nothing's going to show right now. The filter tabs aren't going to show because we turned them off. We're building our own, and we haven't outputted any record values yet, so that's fine. The component's actually loading, but it's just nothing there. So back into here, we will now start to build out our filter tab section. And that's going to start with, as usual, a div element. So we're going to start with 1, and then inside of that, we're going to have 2 more. So 1 and let's see, 2. Okay, so the first one, we have the master kind of overall wrapper or container, and that's going to be, let's give that a class so we can style it and define it later. List, can't type with my microphone in the way. List actions, okay. The next one doesn't need a class. Neither one of these really need a class. And then inside of this one, we're going to have a count of our total list items, which is pretty cool. So we'll do that there, and that's going to be done using a built-in custom component helper. So here I'm going to go ahead and paste that value in here, and what we've done is we've created a span tag and given it a class of task count. Again, we're always giving things classes when we want to style them and add CSS specifically for them. And then here is that helper that we can use. So this is a built-in helper to get the total amount of records that are loading here. And then we'll just add some text after this to define what that number is. And in this case, it's just items. So that's all we need for that. Now on to the actual filter tabs. I'm going to paste that in as well. Again, we can reference this from our help center about how to add these particular filter tabs in. But you can see we have an ID, TB ID 1, 2, and 3. So filter tab 1, filter tab 2, filter tab 3. And then I've changed the value here for each one to match what's in the filter. So all, active, and completed. Now these don't actually have to match. You could make these the TB value section actually say something different if you wanted to. And then I've also, of course, added a class to style it like a button. Okay, and that's it for the list sections or list actions section. Okay, now the next thing we are going to do is we are going to start looping through our records. So this is going to create kind of that like header with the actions. Actually, before we move on, let's go ahead and preview this and take a look to see what that looks like. So you can see it says 3 items. Great, right? Because we do have 3 items in this list. And then we have our filter tabs. So now let's actually display these records. Again, we're starting with our div element, and we'll give this a class of list item. Okay, because that's kind of what this whole section is going to be about. And then we'll create another one. So we'll do div class equals. This is going to be the item name. And let's see. I'm sorry, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. We're going to pull in some other copy and paste. We have another one for an action button. So we want an action link in this case. We're going to use an action link to actually complete the task and check it off the list. And we need to set up that action link. So let's go into links, action link. And in this case, we are going to, we're not going to give it a name at all. We're going to do that with some CSS. We're just going to give it an icon. And the action rule is going to be to update the record and set the done field to completed. And maybe I'll change the message here. Sorry. Done. All right. So the thing with what we're doing with the actual item name. All right. So let's start with this, and then we'll go into more detail about what we're actually trying to do here. This will output the actual name, and now we should actually see all of our 3 records. Let me finish the what am I saying? The action link here. So let's put this in. There we go. Okay, so here's our 3 list items. Here's the action link, but again, we're gonna figure this part out later. We're gonna restyle this and change how it looks. But here's our 3 items, and I can click that link, and you'll see completed now shows as eggs. But obviously, we need a lot more feedback to the user here. So we're gonna show a check mark. We're gonna cross it off the list. We're gonna change the color. We're gonna make this way easier to kind of use and view. So what we can do inside the custom component is we can conditionally output any of our HTML. So basically, if a value is done, we want to do something else or output it differently. And if it's not done or completed, then we're going to output something else. So we can conditionally choose based on a field value what HTML we actually want to output. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, then we can choose to output something else. And we're going to use that to our advantage here to help us style everything. All right. And this will make more sense as we actually go through it. But the first thing we're going to do is add, here, let's do this. Let's get this out of the way because we're just kind of looking at this one section. We're looking at the item name. Okay. So this will load onto the page, the actual name of the item. But we want to check that item, the actual record itself, and we want to look at the field 56, which is the done field. And we'll use the the is helper here to say, is field 56 completed? So is the value of the done field completed? If it is, then we're going to output this. And then we can use else to say, if it is not, output something else. So if it is completed, we want to show a check mark. We want to cross it off the list. We want to change the actual font color. So the reason we're choosing to output 2 different versions of this, the item name, is because we're actually going to use the CSS classes to our advantage. So what's really cool about the custom component is we can give something a class, and the class can actually be the record value of something. So in this case, right, if the done field is completed, then we're going to output that value as a class, CSS class. So then we can target it by the actual record value later on. Additionally, inside of this particular thing, in order to show the icon, we're going to include this section here for this font awesome icon of a check mark. Okay, and then we have a space, and then we'll have our title. Okay, so if you can imagine this, it's going to be a paragraph of text starting with an icon, then a space, and then the name of the item. So let's go check that out. Hopefully I did this right and didn't make any errors, which I must have made an error somewhere because it's not loading. So let's go back and look to see what I broke. I did not close the is helper. So we actually need to go in here and close it, just like any of these other helpers where we start with each and end with each. We started with is, we have an else in the middle, and now we need to close the is helper. Okay. Now that should work. All right. So eggs is completed. The other one's not. And you can see the else is now outputting an empty paragraph tag. So we have to go back and add that. So if we add in our title, that's good. There. So is it done? Yes. Great. Then give it a class of completed, show the icon, and we'll style that in a minute. The last conditional thing that we're going to do is when something is done, we don't want to show the action link because the action link is built to actually check it off the list. So once it's checked off the list, we don't need the action button anymore. So we're going to use a variation of the is helper here, the direct opposite of isn't. So we can type isn't. Well, we need this first. Isn't field 56 completed. So making sure that the done field is not completed, then show this. And we're not going to do a an else in this case. We only just need the single condition. So field 56 is not completed. Output the action link, and that's it. So just by doing so and going back, and we'll see eggs, now that button, even though it wasn't really so much of a button, that button underneath eggs is now gone. So now we're at the point where our actual HTML structure is built and we can go through and style everything. Okay, back to the live app. We are going to start with our CSS. So we have our handy dandy little CSS tool here, our browser extension, and we're going to start with list header, which is one of the classes that we assigned. And you can see it highlights that up here. And then within that, we also had the list title. So these are the two things up here that we are going to style for the detail component, the list header and the list title. Now, the list header, the first thing we want to do is just ensure that the text is aligned to the left. Probably unnecessary to do that, but I'm going to put it in anyways. And we're going to add a border on the bottom of it. Let's see, just like a light gray. So hopefully you can actually see that. It's very subtle. We could make it maybe slightly darker there. And that's all we want to do there. We just want to separate the header section from the rest of the what's going to be our final or finished product. Now the list title itself, which is the actual text of grocery list, this is now what we're going to do, or we're going to start make that bigger and a little bit bolder. So we'll do font size. Something like 28 pixels seem to work well, so we'll work with that. And then we'll make it bolder, like I said, and do font weight of 900. And now we have our big, bold list title. All right, so moving on, that is for the detail CSS. So we'll put a little comment in here just to help us out with that. Moving on from that, we're going to do the list item CSS, which is going to be everything for down here. Okay, and we're going to start kind of working from the top down. We have our list actions section here, and we'll highlight that just so you can see what I'm referencing. The spot with the 3 items and the buttons. For this, we actually want to display them side by side. So we're going to use display flex in order to collapse them a little bit and make them really easy to manipulate. So then we can use justify content and space between to space them equally. Where to go? Super wide. super wide because it takes up 100% width. So let's actually move this over here. Not the best spot for it, but we'll make it work. Okay, let's do this instead then. Right, you can see list actions is 100% width of this particular component, or the column and the row and the page width. So it's filling that whole width, and that's fine because we're going to fix it later. We're going to make it a little bit smaller. So let's just clean this up slightly for now. All right, so we have space between, and then we're going to give the, there's going to be a margin here between the top of this section and the bottom. So we can do 20 pixels to define the top and the bottom, and 0 to define the left and the right, and leave it like that. So now there's a 20 pixel margin at the top of list actions and a 20 pixel margin at the bottom of list actions. Now the next one will be task count, which is obviously that one right there. So that particular piece of text, we're going to change the color to something a little bit lighter, not so harsh of a black font color there. And then we'll do font style. We'll make this italic. Font size, we'll make it a little bit larger. And we want to make sure that it stays all the way over on the left there. So we're going to do justify self. And probably, I don't think we actually need this, but we're going to do it anyways, just to be sure. Flex start. So the start of the flex box, because the parent container in this case of list actions has display flex. We can justify the child of task count, justify itself as the flex start. So all the way to the left in this case. Now the buttons themselves are a little bit big. So we're going to just adjust those slightly. So we'll do list actions. Okay, so that selects the parent container, but then within that container, we want to select anything with the class of button, or BTN rather, primary. So that's going to give us these 3 items over on the right. Okay, and then we are just going to change the padding of these buttons to shrink them a little bit. 2 pixels on the top and the bottom, 5 pixels on the left and the right. And you can see that shrunk them down a little bit. Okay, moving right along. The next thing is the actual list item. Now, the list item is the actual record. Okay, so the list item record of eggs, list item record of milk and bread. So we're going to change this around. We're going to also use display flex because this has multiple pieces within the list item, right? We have the list item, then we have the actual text, then we have the button and the icon too. So we're going to use display flex again just to make things really easy and simple to manipulate. Just to make sure that this takes 100% width of all the parent containers there. For justify content, we're going to do space between, just like we did above. So this is going to split everything apart. So now you see the titles on the left and the button or the action link is on the right, all the way apart. And the nice thing about this, which I didn't really mention specifically, but with when you're using display flex, this becomes incredibly responsive. So when I shrink this page here, let's just, what am I doing? Here we go. You can see just by opening up the developer panel here, it's shrunk and everything moves really, really nice. So that's why we're using display flex. Okay, and then align items. So justify content tells us how we want to space things across the main axis, which in this case is horizontal. Align items tells us how we want to space things out on the vertical or Y axis right now, secondary axis in this case, but in this it's the vertical one. Anyways, we're going to center them. So that means that the bread, the text, and the button are now in line vertically. Okay, and then the last thing for each item, for each record, we're going to do a margin on the bottom to space them apart from each other by 5 pixels. All right. Okay, so here's the next one, completed. So part of our template code here, right? I'm just going to go back and show you this one more time. Is when this particular record is outputted, right? Field 56, which is the done field. So field 56 is completed. Then we output this piece of code right here, this HTML, and we've used a record value as an actual CSS class. So when the value is completed, the class of this paragraph becomes completed. So now we can target that using dot completed there, and you'll see that it only selects the one that's actually done. So here's what we're going to do for this one. We're going to change the color of it. So we're going to make it a little bit darker, or I'm sorry, lighter, not darker, lighter. Goodness, what am I doing? Okay, color. All right, there you go. And you can see it's now turned to a lighter gray because it's not as important at this point. It's we're trying to just kind of hide it a little bit. So we're just going to change the color. Now we're going to do dot completed. In this case, we're going to select the icon completed, and the icon just gives us the icon. And here's what we're going to do for that one. I'm going to start copy and paste to finish this off. We're going to change the color, and we are going to put a little margin in there just to space out the icon and the text. But I think I'm actually going to change that back to 5. 10 was a little bit too much. The action button now. The action button outputs as a link, an actual link tag in the HTML, so an A tag. So to target this, we gave it a class of action button. You can see it highlights it over there on the right, but we want to actually select the link inside. And we are going to give it a fixed height, fixed width, and a background color. You can see it now changes it like this. So this whole thing kind of becomes a big button. Um, and now we are going to use what's known as a pseudo class. So I think it was the last video I made, the supercharged form, where we talked a little bit about pseudo classes. It's essentially like a fake element that we're placing on screen through CSS, and we're able to position it and make it whatever we want. And I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste this in, and we'll talk about it briefly. So as you can see, I've pasted this in, action button, and then here's the pseudo class. We have colon, colon, and then before. So there's before and after. We're using before in this case. Um, and we've placed an icon inside of the button. So we've included a font family of Font Awesome 5 Pro. We've given it a font weight of 900. We've given it a color, a font size. And then this is the important bit right here that actually outputs the icon. So we can use a content code in this case for the content property to say this, backslash or forward slash F058 equates to the check mark. Okay, and then we can continue on with some other normal stuff of the height and the width of this actual pseudo element, and positioning and how we're positioning it. So 53% from the left. If I change this to something like 5, you can see it moves off. Or if I do 40, you can see it's slightly off center. But 53 was the magic number in my case. And 2 pixels down from the top worked well for that. Now, pointer events none is so that we can actually click anywhere inside of this green button area. Okay. And one thing I actually just this is basically it for this CSS for at least this section. Okay, we have we styled our header, we have our form, we have this section here. The last 2 things that we're going to do here is number 1, I forgot that I want to put an empty circle next to the incomplete items. And then we need to combine all 3 of these pieces. So the detail custom component, the form, and the list custom component. So we're going to go ahead and go back here. I forgot that I want to give it an icon. So an empty circle for the ones that are incomplete. So we're going to put this in here. iClass just circle. So not check circle, but circle. Got to go ahead and turn this CSS back on. The CSS is not saved in the custom component yet or in the actual application yet. It's just running inside this extension. So I've turned this on. You can see now everything is working as intended. So we'll click the button, checks it off the list. We get our message, changes the color, changes the icon, and our filter tabs working as intended. So that's all great. I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to the builder. And normally, what I would do is I would actually place the relevant CSS inside of the corresponding custom component. But in this case, I'm just going to put it right on the page for now, just so that we can see it all as kind of an overview. Okay, so I can save that, and now I don't need my extension anymore. It'll just load with the page. Okay, so last final thing we need to do is combine all of this into kind of a single component, or at least we're going to kind of fake it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use one row and one column. All right, so the row, I'm going to make sure that this is toggled to um, fixed. Yeah, I think I'm going to do fixed in this case. So make the whole thing a little bit skinnier on the page. And I'm going to change this column. So I'm going to go into the column settings and give it a custom CSS class of family underscore list, because I'm going to make some changes to this actual column. All right, now I'm going to drag this form up into that column underneath the detail component. And then I'm going to drag the list custom component underneath the form. So now we have 1, 2, 3 items. We've compressed it all from 3 individual rows and columns into 1 row, 1 column, 3 components inside of 1 column. And I might as well just delete these while we're here, the extra rows. But now you can see when we refresh this, nothing looks too different yet until we actually start to style out the family list, the column itself. So we're going to go back to our app here. We're going to add one final piece of CSS to the top here. Pretty simple, easy stuff. That doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, but we have family list is our selector here. We're giving the whole column a background color of white. We're giving the entire column a border radius of 2 rem, which is a relative value based on screen size and things like that. And then padding, we're also giving that a relative value as well. So padding, we are saying how far is the content from the border. But just by doing that, going back and refreshing this, we've now kind of disguised these 3 components as a single component. So if I go back in here and we'll add cereal to our list. There we go. It's added here. Now I'm at the store. I can check off my items and our checklists are complete. Okay, so that's it for today's episode of Build It with Tim. We're still going to be doing a part 3 that's coming a little later, and it's going to involve the family calendar and Google Calendar. But today, right, we've stylized this form and taken our actual page content to the next level with the custom component. You can tell I very much like the custom component. I'm going to try to keep doing more of the custom component. I have a lot of fun with it. So anyways, thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.